Greetings again. We're recording right now, and what we're going to do is go over the Stephen James Doppleganger. There are doppelgangers throughout Eisenman's work. As he gets into the text, he finds names that correspond with each other and places and even words and phrases in two different places that correspond with each other, or at least he finds correspondences to them. And so I never had too good a luck reading this material until I knew the sources. Without the sources, it's just a difficult reading exercise. You can't hardly read this just for fun. Because it's like the phone book. You've got lots and lots of names in there, constantly referring to different manuscripts and texts and sources. But unless you know what they are, it's just becomes a jumble. So this time I'm going to read some of these sources, and that will take a little bit of time, but I can give you a link to them as well, so you can follow on if you'd like. First of all, I'm going to go to Acts 6. And if you would like to get on Acts 6, I'm not going to change my screen, but I'll put a link up for you. There's my favorite online link for Bible. Right there, because it's just nothing but the Bible in text in the RSV, and I don't have to deal with all those screens and search engines and stuff. The other one is the martyrdom of James and some other things concerning James, which I wrote up here. And there it is. But we'll start with the Acts. Acts 6, 7. Start there. As we give Yahweh the praise for bringing us together on this special occasion. And the word of Elohim increased, and the number of the disciples multiplied greatly in Jerusalem, and a great many of the priests were obedient to the faith. I doubt they're talking about Sadducees there. And Stephanos, full of favor and power, did great wonders and signs among the people. Then some of those who belonged to the synagogue of the freedmen, as it was called, and of the Cyrenians, those from Cyprus, and the Alexandrians, and of those from Cilicia, and Asia, arose. Okay, trying to be like Obama, Pakistan, trying to pronounce these the way they were pronounced. Cilicia and Asia arose and disputed with Stephanos, but they couldn't withstand the wisdom and the spirit with which he spoke. They then secretly instigated men who said, "We have heard him speak blasphemous words against Moses and Elohim." And they stirred up the people and the elders and the scribes, and they came upon him and seized him and brought him before the council, and set up false witnesses who said, "This man never ceases to speak words against this holy place and the law. But we have heard him say that this Jesus of Nazareth will destroy this place and will change the customs that Moses delivered unto us." And gazing at him, all who sat in the council saw that his face was like the face of an angel, And the high priest said, "Is this so?" And then there's a long speech here that Stephen, or whoever the writer here of the Acts, is not preaching to the Sadducees or the Pharisees or the council members. He's giving us the story because he's assuming that we are Gentiles that are reading. The council would never need to know this. They already knew all this. They had to recite it all the time. So we skip down to the crux of the matter, and we get down to Acts 7:54. And when they heard these things, they were enraged, and they ground their teeth against him. But he, full of Holy Spirit, gazed into the sky and saw the esteem of Elohim, and Yahshua standing at the right hand of Elohim. And he said, "Behold, I see the heavens opened, and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of Elohim." Remember that, the sight of the skies opening up, because we'll see that again. But they cried out with a loud voice and stopped their ears and rushed upon him. Then they cast him out of the city, and stoned him, and the witnesses laid down their garments at the feet of a young man named Shaul. And as they were stoning Stephanos, he prayed, "Master, Yahshua, receive my spirit." And he knelt down and cried with a loud voice, "Master, do not hold this sin against them." And when he had said this, he fell asleep. Acts 8:1, and Shaul was consenting to his death, and on that day a great persecution arose against the assembly in Jerusalem, and they were all scattered throughout the region of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. Now let's go to James. And let me see, what part of this do I want to look at? Oh, of course, I've got to read through the Clementine section of the recognitions. And we'll get a story that's similar, that you probably already know and heard 100 times. This comes from the Clementines, or the Nazarene Acts, chapter 50, 60, 68, 50, 60, is that right? 68, yes, through 71. These sayings of Gamaliel did not much please Caiaphas, and holding him in suspicion, as it seemed, he began to insinuate himself cunningly into the discussions. For, smiling at what Gamaliel had said, the chief of the Kohanim asked of Yaakov, the chief Mivaker, that the discourse concerning Moshiach should not be drawn but from the scriptures, that we may know, said he, whether Yahshua be the very Moshiach or no. Then said Yaakov, speaking of the brother, James, we must first inquire from what scriptures we are specially to derive our discussion. And he, with difficulty, at length overcome by reason, answered that it must be derived from Torah, and afterwards we made mention also of the Naviim. To him our Yaakov began to show that whatsoever things the Naviim say, they have taken from the Torah, and what they have spoken is in accordance with Torah. He also made some statements respecting the scrolls of the kings, in what way and when and by whom they were written, and how they ought to be used. And when he had discussed most fully concerning Torah, and had, by a most clear exposition, brought into the light whatever things are in it concerning Mashiach, he showed by most abundant proofs that Yahshua is the Mashiach, and that in him are fulfilled all the prophecies that related to his humble coming. For he showed that 2 comings of him are foretold, one in humiliation, which is accomplished, the other in glory, which is hoped for to be accomplished, when he will come to give the Malkuth, the kingdom, to those who believe in him and who observe all things that he has commanded. And when he had plainly taught the people concerning these things, he added this also, that unless a man be immersed in water in the name of Yahshua, as Yahshua taught, he can neither receive remission of sins nor enter into the Malkut Shamayim. And he declared that this is the prescription of the unbegotten Elohim, to which he also added, don't think that we speak of 2 unbegotten Elohim, or that one is divided into 2, or that the same is made male and female, but we speak of the only begotten Son of Yahweh, not sprung from another source, but born from Yahweh's bosom, and in like manner we speak of the Ruach. But when he had spoken some of these things also concerning Migvah, or baptism, through 7 successive days he persuaded all the people and the Kohen Hagadol that they should hasten straight away to receive mikvah. So he's doing a baptism convocation there on the temple steps. And they're all coming through, and they're all wondering what he's talking about, and they're asking questions. And I suppose he goes and gets something to eat, and they continue on. 7 days it goes on. Chapter 70. And when matters were at that point that they should come and be immersed, one of our enemies, entering the Hekel with a few men, began to cry out and say, "What mean you, O men of Israel? Why are you so easily hurried on? Why are you led headlong by most miserable men who are deceived by Shimon, a magician?" Pick up on the headlong. One word, we'll see that again. While he was thus speaking and adding more to the same effect, and while Yaakov the Mevaker was refuting him, he began to excite the people and raise a tumult, so that the people might not be able to hear what was said. Therefore, he began to drive all into confusion with shouting, and to undo what had been arranged with much labor, and at the same time to reproach the Kohanim, and to enrage them with revilings and abuse, and like a madman to excite everyone to murder, saying, "What do you? Why do you hesitate, O sluggish and inert? Why do we not lay hands upon them and pull all these fellows to pieces?" And when he had said this, he first, seizing a strong brand from the altar, set the example of smiting. Then others also, seeing him, were carried away with like readiness. Then ensued a tumult on either side, of the beating and of the beaten. Much blood is shed. There is a confused flight, and in the midst of which that enemy attacked Yaakov and threw him headlong from the top of the steps, and supposing him to be dead, he cared not to inflict further violence upon him. Chapter 71. But our friends lifted him up, for they were both more numerous and more powerful than the others, but from their fear of Yahweh, they rather suffered themselves to be killed by an inferior force than that they would kill others. But when the evening came, the Kohanim shut up the Hekel, and we returned to the house of Yaakov and spent the night there in prayer. Then before daylight, we went down to Jericho to the number of 5,000 men. Exodus, out. Then after 3 days, one of the brethren came to us from Gamaliel, whom we mentioned before, bringing to us secret tidings that the enemy had received a commission from Caiaphas, the Kohen Hagadol, that he should arrest all who believed in Yahshua and go to Damascus with his letters, and that they're also employing the help of unbelievers, he should make havoc among the faithful, and that he was hastening to Damascus chiefly on this account, because he believed that Kepha had fled thither. And about 30 days thereafter, he stopped on his way while passing through Jericho, going to Damascus. At that time, we were absent, having gone out to the sepulchres of two brethren that were whitened of themselves every year, by which miracle the fury of many against us was restrained, because they saw that our brethren were held in remembrance before Yahweh. In this account, we never get the name, but what we do get is an identification of that enemy by inference. So in this account, we have Pharisees that are on the side of Yahshua, and we have Sadducees that are not. And we're speaking of Paul, of course. Paul tells us in his autobiographical literature that he is a Pharisee and a Hebrew among Hebrews. But he goes to the high priest. He goes to the Sadducees for a commission to go get these people and raise havoc with them and arrest them and perhaps even murder them. I don't know. What's his business in Damascus or Damascus? This is the headquarters of a certain group of believers that were called Essenes. He wants to go there, not to Antioch. He wants to go to Damascus, and he just misses the group, because as they head out for the redoubt in Jericho, he's going to Damascus, then coming back. They pass each other, and they happen to see, that is, the exiles happen to see the two sepulchres that whiten of themselves. These sepulchres, as you probably know, were something that Professor Eisenman was looking for an archaeological site for, so there could be some archaeological find from the Clementines that would prove some authenticity. And sure enough, he found this place, or I should say his students found this place, and somewhere on YouTube, he'll take you there and show you this place with the sepulchres or the tombs or the stones that whitened of themselves every year. Pretty fascinating to me. Then we go to another section. Yeah, we'll look at the Gospel of Thomas here just for a verse or two. The disciples said to Yahshua, according to Yehuda Didymos Toma, "We know that you will depart from us. Who is it who will lead us?" Yahshua said to them, "Wherever you have come from, go to James the Just, Yaakov HaZadik, for whom heaven and earth came to be." And I have a note there from 2nd Baruch that's important, 14:19. "Now I see that as for the world that was made on account of us, lo, it abides, but we on account of whom it was made, depart." Gives an insight into this saying here, for whom sky and land came to be. We know Acts 15, where James is the chief arbiter of the so-called covenant of Gentiles. But we don't find in Acts any place where he's actually rendered the authority to do so, unless we understand that Stephen is a doppelganger for James, and we'll get into just what perspectives of Stephen remind us of James and remind us of these texts. But we see in the Gospel of Thomas that he is rendered the authority to be the leader, And not only that, but several other texts do the same. Then finally, we have it's important that we have the martyrdom of James, who was called Bar Mara, son of the master. And what I have here is Eusebius' ecclesiastical history. There are several accounts that build on each other. The earliest one concerning James' martyrdom is from Hegesippus, who lived in the late 1st century. He was an Ebionite believer that had converted over to so-called orthodoxy according to Rome anyway. And he told stories about various disciples. He was a church historian. However, just about everything of his was lost. Building on his story is a much later historian, that is Eusebius Pamphilus, who lived in the time of Constantine, which is talking about early 4th century, and was there at the Council of Nicaea, and was actually the official church cleric to the emperor. Remember, at Nicaea, there were 2 Eusebius there. One was what we would call Orthodox, a Trinitarian, and the other one was an Arian. I got a message here. Is everything working here? I don't see it. Am I just blowing hot air? I guess not. So we have a building up, and finally Epiphanius puts the capper on, in a literal sense. He puts the turban of the high priest on James' head and has him in the Kadosh Kadoshim, the Holy of Holies, to make restitution prayer for the sins of Israel. Thus, James becomes an opposition high priest. Well, how can that be? James had the blood for it. None of the high priests there had the priestly blood, but he had won over the people. And we remember that the elders are talking to Paul at the end of Acts, saying, look at the thousands, the myriads that have come to be zealous for the Torah. But that's another chapter in the New Testament code. This is from Eusebius. But the Jews, after Paul had appealed to Caesar and had been sent by Festus to Rome. Good, thank you. Yes, which you want, what Nazarene Acts reference do you want? The beating of James, where he's left for dead?
Yes, please, sorry.
All right, that's about book 1, 68, 69 through 71.
Thank you.
You're welcome. After Paul had appealed to Caesar, you wonder what that's doing in there. Paul? And had been sent by Festus to Rome, frustrated in their hope of entrapping him by the snares they learned, turned themselves against Yaakov, the brother of the master, to whom the episcopal seat at Jerusalem was committed by the apostles. That corresponds to the Mivaker that we read about in the recognitions. The following were their nefarious measures also against him, conducting him into a public place They demanded that he should renounce the faith of the Anointed One before all the people, but contrary to the sentiments of all, with a firm voice, and much beyond their expectation, he declared himself fully before the whole multitude and confessed that Yeshua, the Anointed One, was the Son of Elohim, our Savior and Master. Unable to bear any longer the testimony of the man who, on account of his elevated virtue and piety, was deemed the most just of men, they seized the opportunity of licentiousness afforded by the prevailing anarchy. Anarchy because there had been a new governor appointed, and he hadn't showed up yet. And the new appointed high priest hadn't showed up yet. So there was anarchy going on in the council there, and the high priest, whose name was Ananus, had sent letters to the Sanhedrin that before Albinus or I get there, I want him dead. For as Festus died about this time in Judea, the province was without a governor and a head. But as to the manner of Yaakov's death, it has already been stated in the words of Clement that he was thrown down from a wing of the temple and beaten to death with a club. Hegesippus also, who flourished nearest the end of the days of the apostles, in the 5th book of his commentaries, gives the most accurate account of him thus. And here's Hegesippus' complete account that is nested within the Eusebian account. But Yaakov, the brother of the master, who, as there were many of this name, was surnamed the Just, or Tzaddik, by all, from the days of our master until now, received the government of the assembly with the apostles. This apostle was consecrated from his mother's womb. He drank neither wine nor fermented liquors, or abstained from animal food. A razor never came upon his head. He never anointed with oil and never used a bath. That's got to be understood in the context with which it's in. It doesn't mean that he was unclean. And in those days, in lieu of bath, they would put oil all over themselves and rub it in. Oil, of course, draws flies, it draws dust, etc. He alone was allowed to enter the sanctuary. How could that be? He never wore woolen but linen garments. Yes, maybe the Greek bath. They say maybe the pool of Siloam was a Greek bath. He was in the habit of entering the temple alone and was often found upon his bended knees and interceding for the forgiveness of the people, so that his knees became as hard as camels in consequence of his habitual supplication and kneeling before Elohim. Or maybe because, as it says in the recognitions, he broke his legs going down the steps of the temple. And indeed, on account of his great exceeding piety, he was called the Just, and Oblius, and Azulkam, which signifies justice and protection of the people, as the prophets declared concerning him. Some of the 7 sects, therefore, of the people, mentioned by me above in my commentaries, ask him, what was the door to Yeshua? Think gate here. And he answered that he was the Savior, from which some believe that Yeshua is the Anointed One, but the aforesaid heresies didn't believe either a resurrection or that he was coming to give to everyone according to his works. As many, however, as did believe, did so on account of Yaakov. As there were many of the rulers that believed, there arose a tumult among the Jews, scribes, and Pharisees, saying that there was danger, that the people would now expect Yahshua to come as the Messiah. So they came together and said to Yaakov, "We beg you to restrain the people who are led astray after Yahshua as if he were the anointed one. We beg you to persuade all that are coming to the feast of the Passover rightly concerning Yahshua, for we all have confidence in you. For we and all the people bear the testimony that you are just, and you do not respect persons. So persuade the people not to be led astray by Yahshua, for we and all the people have great confidence in you. Stand upon a wing of the temple, and we'll show you what confidence we have. For we and all the people may easily hear your words. Stand upon the wing, that you may be conspicuous high up, and your words may be easily heard by all. For all the tribes have come together on account of the Passover, with some Gentiles also." The aforesaid scribes and Pharisees placed Yaakov upon a wing of the temple and cried out to him, "Oh, you just man, whom we should all believe, since the people are led astray by Yahshua that was crucified. Declare to us, what is the door to Yahshua that was crucified?" Yes, they have to throw in the crucified part. And he answered with a loud voice, "Why do you ask me about Yahshua, the Son of Man? He is now sitting in the skies on the right hand of the power, and is about to come on the clouds of the sky." And as many were confirmed and gloried in this testimony of Yaakov, and said, "Hosanna to the Son of David." These same priests and Pharisees said to one another, "Oh, we have done badly in affording such testimony to Yahshua, but let us go up and cast Yaakov down, that they may dread to believe in him." And they cried out, "Oil, oil, the just one himself is deceived." And they fulfilled what is written in Isaiah, "Let us take away the just one, because he is offensive to us. Wherefore they will eat the fruit of their doings." Isaiah 3:11. So going up, they cast down the just man, saying to one another, "Let us now stone Yaakov Hazadik." And they began to stone him. And as he did not die immediately when cast down, but turning round, he knelt down, saying, "I entreat you, O Yahweh Elohim and Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Thus they were stoning him, and one of the priests of the sons of Rechab, the son of the Rechabites, spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, crying out, saying, "Stop! What are you doing? The just one is praying for you." And one of them, a fuller, beat out the brains of the just one with the club that he used to beat out clothes. Thus he suffered martyrdom, and they buried him on the spot where his tombstone is still remaining, by the temple. He became a faithful witness both to the Jews and Greeks that Yahshua is the anointed one. Immediately, Vespasian invaded and took Judea. This is also echoed in Josephus' account of the death of James in his Antiquities, where right after James is stoned, we have Paul making an appearance in Josephus with his brother and his gang, causing a riot in the city. Now, I never thought that would take so long to read that. Now that we want to go to Acts 6. We have a dichotomy in the Acts continually. We're confused between Hebrews and Hellenists. It looks to me like there was actually some kind of parting of the two. And if this was the Antioch in Syria, we know also that the Greeks in Antioch massacred all the Jews in the 60s. So we can't understand that generally they had good relations one with another. So it's a little confusing. That's why Antioch on the Calaroa is probably a more reasonable place, because it was a safe place for them all. We go to the table waiters for an introduction to Stephanos. Table waiters or deacons, the word diakonia, diakonon, or diaconia. I think I said that one. We get the word in English deacons. It's the same word that we find in Timothy and Titus concerning the actual office of a deacon in a church. It just simply means a minister or a servant. In this case, it also means the very same word, one who waits on tables. That's where the writer of Acts gets this. And he talks about Philippos, Prochorus, Nicanor, Timon, Parmenas, Nicholas, before he gets to Stephen. He says Nicholas is a convert to Judaism, not necessarily Nazarene Judaism, but we also have a Nicholas in Revelation that early commentaries on Revelation say the apostate Nicholas, leading people astray, is the same one that's spoken of here in Acts. I don't know. But one thing that I have learned is that all these names have to do with the assembly, or at least they seem to have to do with offices and assembly. Philippos, it's the guy that likes horses, or the caretaker of horses or other animals. Or, it could be the caretaker of hippopotamuses they ride into the assembly in Antioch. They probably had a hippopotamus barn there, with a baptismal that they could get in. I don't know. That word hippos means horse or seahorse, a hippo. Then there's Parmenas. Speaking of the guy close by, Parmenas. Did you hear that? Got a storm out here. Boom. Parmenas, the guy close by. Then you've got Prochorus, the music minister, or first in the choir. Then we have Nicanor, the overcomer. Maybe he was a prayer warrior. Nicanor means overcomer or conqueror. Then there's Timon. That would be the emeritus guy, or the honored guy, or even the steadfast guy. Nicholas, I like this one. I think the best translation of that name is the crowd beater. Every assembly has one. Maybe in preaching he would get up and give the old fire and brimstone and call down curses on everybody. Or maybe he just beat people up. Maybe he was like the bouncer for this assembly in Antioch. And it seems like they might have needed one because there are all kinds of riots up here. And that brings us to the introduction of Stephanos, which means the man with the crown, or the mitre, or the turban, the head covering. Probably one of Paul's converts. Stephanos, like Ananias or Ananias, like Judas, the Theudas, Thaddeus, Thomas, Lebbeus, and many others, appear to be doppelgangers of James or other characters, historic characters, that are either dropped out or dishonored in the Acts and the letters of Paul. What names? Name, game, surname, code name. I like that game. 1 Corinthians 16:15, there's a Stephanos there, whom Paul says is the first fruits of Achaia, whose household appointed themselves as servants, diakonos, to the saints, deacons, table waiters to the saints. Now, Achaia is the Greek mainland, or maybe the province in the west coast of Greece, Achaia. And here we have this Stephen that is a deacon again. He's in the background, a background character here of Stephanus, with the root diakon used to access over and over again in Acts chapter 6, that were in regards to these particular ones that were doing the ministrations to supposedly the Hellenistic women. And that's another strange thing about it, because all 7 of them, there's not one Hebrew name there. They are all Greek names, as are several of Yahshua's apostles, like Petros and Andreas and Philippos. We know that Acts borrows liberally from Josephus, that is the Antiquities of the Jews. We know those antiquities were written in the 90s, and then Josephus disappeared after that. Well, there's one Stephen there that really stands out. He's described in Josephus as the emperor's servant. There we have that word yet again. The emperor in question here is Domitian. Domitian was, of course, the youngest son of Vespasian, who burnt down the entire province of Israel up to Jerusalem. Then his son Titus, his older son, destroyed Jerusalem. And the younger son had nothing to do with war, but whereas father and his brother made their names in war, not only in Palestine, but also in Britain, Domitian was kind of held back. He was a little young, and they put him in school to learn how to rule someday if he ever got there. And it appears that after Vespasian's reign for 10 years to 79, and the Vesuvius blow up there in Italy, Titus came on, as the Revelation says, as the 7th head for a short time. Titus only ruled a year and a half, and he died of the flu or a bad cold. And of course, in some accounts, I believe in Suetonius, we have Titus locked in a box of ice. I think we talked about this 100 times. Locked in a box of ice by Domitian, his younger brother, purportedly as the new cure for a cold, locked in a box of ice. This servant of Domitian, named Stephanos, we are told that he took care of funding coming in from overseas, places such as Corinth, where we read in the Corinthians about this other Stephanos that was also a deacon. And we connect it with the other Stephanos that's in the Acts of the Apostles, that's known as a deacon. We also know that this Stephanos that was the deacon of Domitian the emperor, he was mugged. He was mugged during the Passover in 49. You might remember that Passover had the situation of a riot there, and many people were trampled. In one account from Josephus, it says 300 were trampled. In another, it says 3,000 people were trampled to death. This is at the instigation, this riot, of a centurion on the roof that lifted up his skirt, pointed his backside to the crowds worshiping below, and did something absolutely disgusting for which he was beaten. But that's what started the riot. So in Lucan times, when he was writing, probably in the 90s, if he used Josephus' Antiquities, and it appears that he did, with this Stephanos of note here in the time of Domitian, there was probably a plot, because this Stephanos murdered the emperor Domitian. And what comes out of this is that Domitian was a worshiper of the Roman goddess Minerva, and had hoped to turn the whole empire into Minerva worshipers. Domitian considered himself as the moral judge of the entire Roman Empire. He set himself up as a priest. He considered getting the morality of the Roman people to a certain place would change them. But that morality, if we are to follow his lead, was no better than, we might say, any despotic emperor, because he turned himself against Christians. I think probably because his family, the Flavians, were also turning to Christianity. Of course, this would be, at this time, it would be certainly a more Judaic type. In Rome, they just called it foreign superstition. Even from the time of Nero, there were people that were very much influenced by the Nazarene way, by the Nazarene texts, right down to Nero's wife, what was her name, Poppaea, who underground, it kind of got around that she was of a foreign superstition, and that superstition was Nazarene Christianity. Stephanos was the valet, or actually the hand servant of Domitian for a time, stayed in his bedroom, and we understand there was a plot. We understand that this Stephanos, which connects with all the other Stephanos that we're talking about, was a believer. And when Domitian went on a rampage against believers, the first one he got was a fellow that is well observed in the New Testament named Epaphroditus. We read about him in Philippians 2 and 4. Epaphroditus was sick someplace. Paul asked, let's pray for him. And we get the notion that Epaphroditus was one of the secretaries of Paul. Epaphroditus was also one of the chief secretaries of Nero. Not only that, but Epaphroditus, to him was dedicated Josephus' works, that is to say, his vita, or his life story, dedicated to, I always forget his name. What's his name? Epaphras. Yeah, what is it?
Epaphroditus.
Epaphroditus. He's also called Epaphras in there as well. So the last of his killings of believers was, believe it or not, Flavius Clemens, who is the Clement of the recognitions. Understand they both had the same last name. They were cousins. Flavius Clemens was martyred right after Domitian sent his wife, who was also Domitian's cousin, Flavia Domitilla, to the exile island of Pandateria. Nothing to eat there but pandas. Pandateria. This is notorious. There was nothing to eat there. They sent people out there to die or to wait for a while until they could send somebody to murder them. So we have Clement's wife on Pandateria, and we have Clement now going up the martyrdom road and being killed. We have Epaphroditus, who was really killed for his faith, but he was accused of killing Nero 30 years before, which he did with Nero, and he conspired to kill Nero, to commit suicide with Nero. And we have an account of that happening, which I've given several times, when Epaphroditus takes Nero down in his house, and the mob's after him, and the army's after him, and everybody else. And the account says that Nero asked for some help in killing himself, and Epaphroditus pushed the dagger in. But we don't know for sure, because Nero started popping up all over the place. 3 or 4 false Neros popped up, all gathered armies and marched upon Rome, a couple of them. So we don't know if he really died or not. But anyway, Epaphroditus was then checked for Nero's murder after all that time. And so he goes up really for foreign superstition. As I said, the Flavians were fallen like flies. You know, this Caesar's Messiah nonsense, where Vespasian and Titus and Josephus and some others go in and invent Christianity. You've read about that. Well, there's one great big problem with that, and that is Paul. The writers that put that together say that's happened about 70 AD, right after the fall of Jerusalem, that Christianity was invented by Vespasian. But I got to tell you that one thing that everybody's missing on this is that we still have the first-hand writings of Paul, and we can date those to long before 70. The earliest one being 1 Thessalonians, and it speaks of Iesun Christoi right away in that first verse. That's hard to get over, difficult hurdle. More likely, Titus came over to the believer's way of thinking, because Titus had been in contact with so many. And this is also the time that Josephus just disappeared. The logical thing to think that is that Domitian got him too. Because if you read Josephus' works that are extant in Slavonic language, which I believe, and Eisenman believes, are translations of the Aramaic Josephus that has been lost, you'll find that Josephus, at the time he wrote the Slavonic Josephus, is very, well, I should say, on the fence and falling towards belief in John the Baptist and James and all of them. He appears in the reading to be very curious to the point of asking rhetorical questions about this movement. Josephus could well have fell off the fence, but Domitian's killing all his own kin, like Clement and Domitilla and Josephus. What was his last name? Flavius, too. All right, let's see where I am. In fact, I was thinking today, again, who writes Luke? Who writes Acts? Well, I know of one author, a renowned author of that time, that could have put all these things down and certainly had studied into them greatly for at least 30, 40 years, and that is Epaphroditus. I'm going to believe that Epaphroditus actually wrote Acts and Luke, at least gather the sources for that. We know in Acts, the first 15 chapters or 14 chapters are not so much a history, but a teaching experience using novelistic history. After the 15th chapter, you have real history because the source changes. And there's the we section there starting in 17. Somebody went along with Paul or had notes of somebody that went along. And the only one I can think of at that time who was alive in the 90s would have been Epaphroditus. That's 2, 3. Well, I've got more on Domitilla, but I'm going to leave that, skip out of that. I think I'm making the case here for the Stephanos as being, well, that's a good question. The history extent on Epaphroditus, and I just think that we have Paul and we have what Josephus writes about him. I would think a little look at Wikipedia would give you any other sources. But again, listen, we've got Epaphroditus knowing he's going to die for whatever reason. He's going to die. Why is it that Luke Acts is anonymous? Well, you know about these guys that write about illegal things. They get the same punishment. He would have got death for that. Could have been he wrote it and just got found out, and Domitian killed him. That could well have happened under the guise of murdering Nero. So there's little need at this point to remind us about Domitilla or the attack and the recognitions. Because if we're talking about the same Stephen all along, the deacon, servant, table waiter, consider the fun, says Robert, of the writer of Acts transforming these attacks on James, the crown, who wore the turban or crown, or in some old texts it says mitre, of the high priest, to similar acts of Stephen, when the name means crown, and surely is a name taken from some of these other accounts. It's the perfect name. When they call James in another passage there, the crown or the prince. So Eisenman firmly believes that there was no attack on Stephen at all, nor does he think that there was even a believer by that name. For the Acts is really, in a very real way, writing against James. Look, for instance, in John chapter 10. His brothers don't believe him. Someplace else, they think that he's insane. They call his family in. They don't believe him. They think he's insane. Why in the world is James making decisions in Acts chapter 15 when he's never even mentioned anywhere except a brief introduction in chapter 12 of Acts? They don't like him because the party is split. We have in Antioch not the party of the circumcision there. We have a Hellenistic group where every deacon in the whole group is a Hellenist. Speaks Greek, writes Greek. All we have about him is Greek. Antioch being a Greek city, both of them spoke Greek, both Antioch on the Calaroa and the Antioch in Syria. Now, we might ask ourselves, is Acts a random mix of the accounts of James falling from the parapet of the temple, as in Hegesippus, to his beating up in the Clementines, transformed into a parody of Stephen? We find again an anti-Jewish bias as we mix in one more character here, that is Judas the assassin, who falls headlong again, using the exact same words, headlong into the field of blood. And the stoning of James in the Apocalypses of James, very good text from Nag Hammadi if you ever want to read them. They also have an account of James' stoning and of his succession in the priesthood of believers. We also have Stephen and James, exactly the same words, this composite doppelganger thing, cries with a loud voice, while the Jewish crowd at the same time cries out in Acts 7, 57 and 60, exactly the same. And Stephen and James, seeing the heavens opened, as James sees the Son of Man in the reading we had, coming upon the clouds, who is cast down from the foundation of the temple into the gully, just as Stephen is cast out of the city, and we have Stephen fall to his knees, just as James did in Eusebius. And we have the story of James in the Holy of Holies, having knees like camels, having broken his legs as a result of Paul's attack, yet all have called him a righteous one, Oblius, the pillar of the people. And the implication is he was the only one qualified for the priesthood. Same with Stephen, who wears the crown, who is spoken of as the most pious and holy man, and goes out there among the crowd and gives a very similar speech when we get down to the crux of it, and is martyred for that speech. And in his speech, there are a couple problems with it, I might add. Quick reading of Joshua 24:32 versus Acts 7:16. We'll find that Abram's burial site is different. Stephen also says that Yahshua the Nazarene will destroy the place, not the Romans. Stephen actually makes the accusation that Jesus is going to come and destroy that temple, the exact same accusation that Revelation makes. Revelation as the mystery is history. And in retrospect, while Acts the writer is writing in the historical presence, the historical present text. His predictions about Jerusalem have come to pass 25 years earlier. This is hard stuff, no? But it's so much fun. It's so hard to explain. I'm telling you. That gets it through another little piece of chapter 1. I could see carrying on with this for much longer. This could be a life's journey, doing commentary on this text. No, you have to do 3 or 4 per chapter and maybe more. So I did 2 in the preface and 2 on chapter 1. I don't know. Maybe, what references do you want? If you 8 people wouldn't show up, then I could quit doing this. But I'm learning a lot, and I'm doing like 5, 6 different presentations this week. And see, I've got something back here. I'm back into the books again. I haven't looked at a book except cross-eyed for 6 months. I've been wanting to get back and praying about that, and now I'm back again. Yeah, it is awesome. I never thought I'd want to pick up a book. I've been watching TV, relaxing, and being depressed. But I'm feeling a lot better now and getting into things a little deeper. I'm kind of wondering about the Egyptian roots thing. I'm kind of feeling like maybe I shouldn't have even brought that up. I'm just learning it myself. I don't know. You tell me. Well, I love you guys. Think about it, Allison. You think the Egyptian roots are important? I think that probably the church will call me a heretic.
Yeah, I do think they're important in all that we have been, right, since I've been joined in with you guys.
Yeah.
I have learned so much, and linearly, the things that I have learned point to something more than what is just from the Hebrew tradition, and a different starting point, or at least a merging point. Does that make sense?
Yes. Well, there had to be something before.
Yes, and I think that it's not actually like recorded anywhere we can find it. The survivors write the history, right?
Yes. What we have to do is educated speculation. That's all.
Yes, that's all we have. But at least we can speculate. You know, let's not rule it out.
I think we have clues. Some of the clues that we have on Egypt, to me, are decisive on the matter. So when you have the so-called third temple in Temple Scroll and in Ezekiel, that is exactly the same dimensions with the same storehouses as Amarna Temple, and you have this guy Joseph, whose name backwards signifies who he is. The connections are strong, but there's just not much of anything. I listened to
it also depends.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to break you up. It depends also on who's dating you're looking at as to where things fall in. You know? So some scholars say, oh yes, it was not that generation, but some do say it is. So, you know, it's all sort of speculation, but at least it's there's a possibility.
Well,
and
to
it's
me,
worth looking into.
It fits perfectly. You got Abram and Melchizedek, 1600. You have Akhenaten and Joseph, 1400. You have Moses, about 1200. You got David, 1,000. You know, we're moving in 200-year cycles here. And I just
wasn't
go ahead.
wasn't there something about a certain? Wasn't there something that you read about to us about some sort of 400 and something year prophecy that repeated and repeated? I forget that part.
Yes, that is in black holes. Not all the information is from black holes in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but why is this feather being ignored? He's got three of the most, well, to me, the most meaningful books I think I've ever read, especially his second one, The Secret Initiation of Jesus at Qumran, and before that, the Copper Scroll. He maintains that he's found 5 of the treasures of the Copper Scroll. I believe him because he can show from old newspapers and stuff where they've been found.
Do you? Well, I mean, to quote the prologue to the book I just got, the Dead Sea Scrolls Uncovered.
Yeah.
Either you're of one of the schools and one of the elite, or you're a crackpot.
That's right.
It doesn't matter if you're right or not.
Oh, listen, I've read a lot of books on the scrolls, and they never, even Feather, never forgets to put Robert in with the crackpots. But he's got a point here that they can't get over. They use paleography and carbon dating to try to figure out when these scrolls were written. Paleography is nothing but guessing. There's really, you know, we've got these paleographers, they're 100 years old, and they've been doing it for so long, and everybody believes them because they're high in the Catholic Church. And then you've got carbon dating, where you might get within 200 years back then, or you might take a piece off the shroud that's been affected by fire or put on there in medieval times. But there are other things, like on the shroud there is pollen. Pollen, you can't argue with that because it's organic. Same way with Eisenman's idea of internal evidence. I read these scrolls, guys, and they're trying so hard to fit this into either 2nd or 1st century BC. And Wise, in his The First Messiah, he does a great job. I learned a lot from that book, but nothing fits the Habakkuk Pesher like 60, 58 AD. Nothing. Yes, he is. Wise got in trouble over that book that you just got. He was with Eisenman on that, and when they took him to court about this one text, the MNT that's in there, that was lifted from somebody else, they put these Eisenman and Wise under scrutiny here at the court, and Eisenman said, I don't give a damn what you do. But Wise was just starting out when that thing was written, about 1990, if I'm not mistaken. And Wise had to completely condescend to those people, or he wouldn't have had a career at all. It's not what you do, it's who you know in that system. So everybody hates Robert as it is. What did he have to lose, even back then? He made discoveries that had to revolutionize the whole scroll translating business. And did you notice, after he came out with James, the brother of Jesus, every pea-picking consensus scholar had to come out with another book, even if they had to reprint some old book they did on it. All of them did, because he changed the whole paradigm, and they hate him for it. They hate him for it. Yet, again, sometime we'll do the Habakkuk Pesher, which, Allison, I know you know a lot about, but the imagery is almost flawless insofar as it copies the history as we know it in the 50s. It's flawless. It's spot on, exactly. So no matter how much I like Wise's ideas, I've got to stick with Robert's ideas on this because of the historical record that we have. It's just point by point in that Pesher with what we know. Point by point. Let's see, anything else on this chat? Kowtowing. Yes. Well, I want to go down to storage where we have our library and I've read that book, Secret Initiation, several times. And I'm fascinated every time. And I've been with Robert Feather talking to him about it, especially over the Greek letters in the Copper Scroll. We've talked about that, and I believe that he nailed half of them, and I think I nailed the other half. We'll see. We'll see. Thank you again for coming. I appreciate you being here because I wouldn't be doing this if you didn't find an interest in these things. Yah be with you.